Okay, this is another story, When Spelling Matters. It's a long story and quite a passionate one. When I was an English consultant, I did a lot of work with teachers and a lot of work with parents. I actually did 95 workshops in 1 year in spelling. And what worried me was I could fill gymnasiums with people who were interested in spelling. I wanted them to be interested in literacy. I wanted them to be interested in storytelling. But they were interested passionately in spelling, almost like a moral issue. Like, I think only abortion aroused such passion as spelling. That's very scary to me. I think it's maybe because it's so public. And what I want to offer you today is When Spelling Matters, because I think that's really important. It doesn't matter all of the time. Spelling doesn't matter all of the time. It doesn't matter if you misspell broccoli on the list of groceries that you're going to get. It doesn't matter if a child is writing a loving letter to mom and he misspells love. It still is endearing. It doesn't matter in texting, as you all know, and probably if you have teenagers, they drive you crazy. It doesn't matter in informal writing. It doesn't matter with fledgling writers. But when it becomes public, then it really matters. If you're doing meter-high signs on a road, it really matters. It matters for clarity because sometimes if you're saying not a through toad, that doesn't convey the same meaning as not a through road. It's very important if you're having a literacy night because it can be very embarrassing if you're having a literacy night. You notice the school is obliterated from that time. It can be embarrassing if you're running for president, and not only is tomorrow misspelled behind you, but it's repeated all over the screen, misspelled. The press had a heyday with that one. That's a time to spell check. Really important time to spell check. It can matter when reporting. I was down in the States in April in Myrtle Beach, so I've had 2 springs, and actually yesterday winter. But when Thatcher died, there was a flash came across the news update, Thatcher died. And a lot of people, a lot of young people who developed this technology haven't heard of Margaret Thatcher. So they changed it to news update that Cher died. And Cher was woken up from wherever she was staying to verify that she was very much alive. And so it really matters then. So it matters some of the time, but you know what? Thinking matters all of the time. And our new research on spelling on the last 10 years says that spelling is a thinking activity. We used to think that spelling was a low-level rote memory activity, that children just memorized words and somehow they magically spat them out in their writing. Now we know they don't do that. And if any of you are married to spellers, I just want to put in a little plug against spellers. The average speller between grade 3 and 8 will teach 3,000 to 4,000 words. Children can memorize those. The average child knows at least 15,000 words. The average adult knows at least 35,000 words, and an educated adult knows at least 50,000 words. So if you've learned 4,000, you're a little short. So what we need to do is realize that spelling is a thinking activity. It's not low level memory, it's a highly visual skill, and it is a thinking activity. So thinking matters all of the time. And so when you're teaching spelling, don't hesitate, but integrate. Spelling is only important when you integrate it with writing and with reading. And the only purpose for spelling is in writing. I know that none of you did this, but when I was a young teacher, which was a very long time ago, as Larry so nicely pointed out, I used to write things on report cards like, Jeremy gets perfect scores every week on spelling tests. However, Jeremy must apply these skills in his writing. Now, what was the point? What was the point of him getting perfect scores in rote memory if he didn't apply it in his writing? Because the purpose of spelling well is to write well with clarity. And that's why the subtitle of my book is called Developing Writers. Okay, I haven't memorized this, obviously. Developing writers who can spell and understand language, because that's important. There's lots of vocabulary in science, in mathematics that is specialized that children have to learn to spell. So it's very important to integrate. So one of the things I'm going to say today is because spelling is a thinking activity, what matters when you teach spelling? And I'm going to give you 5 things to remember, and I'll go through each of the 5, and that's what I want to leave you with today. When you teach spelling in the 21st century, you need to focus on patterns. You need to focus on engagement and curiosity. I'll deal with each of these in turn. You need to focus on thinking and problem solving. You need to focus on co-creating a love of words. And lastly, you need to focus on linking problem solving with words to writing, the most important part of all. That's what matters when you teach spelling. So first of all, what happens when you teach spelling? You focus on patterns. Now you say, Doreen, if we look at spelling patterns, there's too many. But I'm going to suggest to you that there's only really 3. And the 3 patterns are sound patterns, which you really deal with a lot in primary. You look at graphophonic patterns or visual sound patterns. That's important. You need to look at syntax patterns, which are verb endings, and looking at the structure of words. And you need to look at semantic or meaning patterns, which is looking at prefixes and word origins, and we'll have a little fun with that later. Now the emphasis is not on boredom, but on having fun with words. And there's a book here I like called Circus Caps for Sale, where a peddler is balancing caps on his head. And this is the audience participation part. So we're not going to do cap, map, cap, sort of sap, whatever. We're going to do caps for sale. Caps for sale. I've got every kind of cap for sale. I got yellow caps. You say yellow caps in the blanks. I didn't tell you that. Good teachers would have told you that. Okay. Right, so I'll start again. Caps for sale, caps for sale. I got every kind of cap for sale. I got yellow caps.
Yellow caps.
Blue caps.
Blue caps.
Green caps.
Green caps.
Purple caps.
Purple
I got
caps.
caps for sale. I got every kind of cap for sale. Now, the first and last couplet, I want you to join in the next time because we're going to move to a different kind of cap. So we go all together, 1, 2, 3. Caps for sale, caps for sale. I got every kind of cap for sale. I got baseball caps.
Baseball caps.
Ice caps.
Ice caps.
Hub caps.
Hub caps.
Night caps.
Night caps.
I got caps for sale. I got every kind of cap for sale. Now kids can write these, and they're much more innovative than we are at writing them. And so you get into maps for sale, and you can have Google Maps and City Maps and Road Maps and Digital Maps, and it goes on and on. And believe me, you'll get tired of this way before the kids do, because they'll write many, many of these, and they'll have fun with words. And so you can focus them right back, get them back to reality by focusing on sound and doing a little mini lesson, a little mini skill lesson on substituting sounds for cap, map, tap, and so on. And Wiley and Durrell have 35 rhymes like this that say if you teach those rhymes rhyming to little kids, and they're able to substitute, they can learn to spell 500 words. That's quite a good payoff for teaching a few endings. And by the way, I didn't misspell rhyme. I knew you would wonder about that. The word rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E, would be 8 and 8. It doesn't have to have the same spelling. For those of you who are linguists, you know that onset's the beginning of a word and rhyme's the ending. So ap and at and ack, they're all rhymes. And that's what puts you to sleep. So moving right along here, we'll go to a different ending, cat, and we can do cats for sale. So let's do this one. Cats for sale, cats for sale. I got every kind of cat for sale. I got alley cats.
Alley cats.
Calico cats.
Calico cats.
Tabby cats.
Tabby cats.
Cheshire cats.
Cheshire cats.
I got cats for sale. I got every kind of cat for sale. Now look how often you've used the word cat in that rhyme to let them practice and to let them practice the ending without just copying the list 10 times. By the way, it was common practice to have a child write out a word 10 times. After 3, it really doesn't matter. So memory, 3 is enough to write a word, so don't have them write it 10 times, please. Okay, distracting them from writing these rhymes again, you can do book title searches in pairs, and you can have them do the cat and the hat. They'll say, I've got a rhyme, hats for sale. And you say, we're not doing that today. And you have the big book of cats, Splat the Cat, and they're looking for book titles. And they might even get into book title poetry, which is a little contrived, but it's book spine poetry. So it says, the cat in the hat comes back, hate that cat. Dear diary, please understand me. Miss Nelson is missing. The search for forensic evidence, George did it. On board the Titanic, danger, icebergs, dark days in the deep sea. Now it's a little contrived, but it's fun. As kids get older, I've had them do this because they put in words, and so they make book spines with the joining words. The yellow words are inserted. The Book of Virtues, the decisive writer has a room of one's own, goes where angels fear to tread, faces fear itself, becomes the book thief, then the giver. And so a little bit of fun with that. Yeah. So your kids actually have fun with it. It also helps them read and read and read. You have to read every single title. And in every single title, the words are spelled correctly. And if they're not, we can point that out to you. Okay, so back to focusing on engagement and curiosity. We know engagement is very important if kids are to learn. So I assure you that if you do any of these activities, children will be engaged. So you want children to be paying attention to how words are constructed. You want them to develop a habit of mind that looks at words, that is interested in words, that constantly asks questions about words. And so one of the questions that comes up all the time is, when do you double letters? So I give them two words, hop and hope, and ask them what's the difference. And they'll say, one has 3, one has 4 letters. One has a short vowel, one has a long vowel. One has a V at the end, one doesn't. Okay, so those are some differences. So then look at them when we add an ending, like hopped and hoped and hopping and hoping. What do you notice now? When do you double? Does this make a pattern? If you do it for mop and mope, and we have mopped and mope, and we have mopping and moping, is it short vowels that you constantly double letters? Let's see if it works again. Let's try. Rob and robed. Robbing and robing. Tap and tape. Let's look for other words like dig and digging, like run and running, like stop and stopping. And suddenly they go home and they do spelling homework, which raises all of your stock with parents. They love when they have spelling homework, especially if it's thinking spelling homework, when they're going looking for words with double letters and trying to make sense of the language. And here's another pair. And when you're doing pairs of vowels with kids, it's really important that they know there's a limited number of alternatives, not an infinite number of possibilities. We don't want them to think that you can spell a word anyway. So if you have oi as in coil or oi as in boy, you can make a list. And you want them to notice things. One of the things the kid noticed was that oi usually comes in the middle, and then of course we found koi. And that oi usually comes at the end, then we found oyster and royal. But if you have a huge list of words, oi usually comes in the middle, and oi usually comes at the end. So what you want them to do is really notice words. And sometimes you rely on visual feedback, so you write the words 2 ways, because spelling is a highly visual skill. So you write coil and collar, say which one is correct. You all know, you check it off. Then you try 2 more, you say which one is correct, and you check it off. And so you build your list with words that are correct, having seen them visually both ways, having made a choice. And that's an easy way. And probably if you find that if you don't know how to spell a word, you write it 2 ways, and then you pick the one that's correct. That's the visual memory. So if we have 4 pictures and 1 idea, kids love to do this, and there's a game 4 pictures, 1 word. This is a very contrived example. It's beach and peach, and teach and reach. And so what do they have in common? Well, they have EA as vowel paired together. They all have EACH in them. So you want them to notice words. And then they create their own. Here's one they created. It's very difficult to get an illustration for royal. I don't know how you do royal. It looks like a queen, right? So how do you do royal? I don't know. But there's oyster, royal, toy, and boy. So the common idea would be OY. Not much fun to do, but they like doing it this way as opposed to writing a list, and they can write the words out. Here's a more complex one. The game in the app is 4 pictures, 1 word. So I want you to think about what is the word? There's a television, there's some china, there's an airplane, and a game. What word do they have in common? You have to think about this. Spelling's a thinking activity. Okay, we'll come back to this because it's morning, and you know. Wordle and Word It Out and Tag Crowd are all ways to show text visually with most common words. You can contrive this if they're writing certain words, or you can have a piece of text put in, and then it will highlight the most common word. This was a text about the game Wordle, about the visual Wordle, and so they put it in. It can be a lot of fun to do. You can change colors. Kids about 3 are able to do this very well, and so if you can't do it, just ask the kids. You definitely want to focus on thinking and problem solving when you're teaching spelling. And you actually don't just want to have problem solvers, you want to have problem finders. You want them to find problems with words and ask questions about words and try to solve them. And that's always a way to have them keeping thinking. So when they explore words, you want them to ask questions like, I wonder if this happens. I wonder why these words are that way. I noticed that. My question is. You want them to keep asking questions about words. So here are some questions that they asked. These are actual kids that I worked with. I still teach and do substitute work in classrooms. I noticed that oi is in the middle of most words, but oi is mostly at the end. OY is mostly at the end. I noticed that voyage had OY in the middle. I thought it was the only one. Then I found royal. Royal would just look weird. I wonder why we have compound words like snowball and snowstorm. I wonder why Y is sometimes a vowel. I wonder why phone starts with PH. And that led to an inquiry in alternatives to F in spelling. And we found words like graph and words like tough. And we also find that tough, when you have the F sound and it's not spelled F, usually it's double F at the end of a word, but if it is GH, it's only at the end. If you have GH at the beginning, like ghost, it sounds G. So we found all these things out. And we found them, they got really interested. Now, children are not born asking these questions. They're not born, they can be natural storytellers. You know this, if I have grandchildren, they're wonderful storytellers, especially to grandma to explain something. But when you are asking them to notice things about words, you have to teach them how to do this. You have to model it for them, and then teach them how to do it, and they'll do it. So one of the questions they asked was, why do we have silent letters? I thought, oh, that's fantastic. They asked that question. And actually, silent letters are an affectation. Way back in medieval England, they decided they needed to go back to their Latin roots. And det used to be spelled D-E-T-T-E, but they decided they'd go back to debitum, and so they introduced B and made it det, D-E-B-T. And so there's real affectation. Tell kids that story, it'll really impress their parents. And so that's one reason we have silent letters, pure affectation on behalf of the English. So when we were exploring letters, silent letters, we found that some of the time you could hear them. Like in crumble, you could hear the B, but in crumb, you didn't. So we made up a chant together, and so I'll be number 1, and you be number 2. Sound off.
G.
Sound off.
G.
Give me a silent G.
Sound.
Need to hear it.
Signal.
Give me a silent B.
Crumble.
Can't hear it.
Crumble.
What do we know?
They can be quiet.
What do we know?
They can be heard.
Okay, this doesn't work for all of them, but it does work for these ones. And the word two, T-W-O, is a perfect one to do this chant with, because you've got 2 where it's silent, you've got twins, you've got 12, you've got 20, and you've got twice when it can be heard. So that's a way to help children be able to spell 2. Just a little fun with words again. Now, in a pattern investigation, they don't need to know its syntax. I'm just telling you that linguistically. They would say, I wonder if more words end in ER and OR. That was their wondering. I added in people's jobs so that we could make a list. And we started making a list, and they find this incredibly engaging. What we found was it went off the chart. ER words in jobs are much more common, and ER words as an ending are much more common. So if you want to improve your odds, then you would end a word with ER rather than OR. There's fewer. But interestingly, in writer, which ends in ER, author, editor, and illustrator all end in OR. So just an interesting little fact. So another investigation would be endings, looking at shun as an ending. Now what they need to know is it's never S-H-U-N. What you can tell them is most of the time, 88% of the time actually, when they hear the sound shun at the end of the word, it's spelled T-I-O-N, and then the next most common is S-I-O-N. And how I help them remember this is they've got addition, subtraction, and multiplication, where it's T-I-O-N, and division, where it's S-I-O-N. Another little thing that they seem to be incredibly engaged in, which I wouldn't think, but I told them that 1,200 words end in Asian. 1,200 words. There's only 4 exceptions. I said maybe you can find 20, 25. For some reason, they seem to want to find them all. And they also wanted to find the exceptions. There's 2, Appalachian and Dalmatian. Dalmatian's T-I-A-N, Appalachian's C-H-I-A-N, and there's 2 more. But you have to buy the book to find them out. So they come up to me in the yard when I was doing yard duty, my favorite thing, especially last winter when it was, sub-zero. But they come up and say, I've got another one, station. I've got another one, graduation. And for some reason, this fascinated them. And they just kept we covered the cupboards, the wooden cupboard doors, with Asian words. And we never did get to 1200, but that was their goal. And actually, there's only 1196. The other four are exceptions. But they found this a very engaging activity, and they never spelled shun, S-H-U-N, again. So one of the most important things, and Bob demonstrated this for us so beautifully, is you want to co-create a love of words. So I'll say knock knock, and you say who's there. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Anna.
Anna who?
Sorry. Rewind. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Amos.
Amos who?
A mosquito. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Anna.
Anna who?
Another mosquito. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Ray. Ray to get rid of all these mosquitoes. And so children will know 1,000 of these. And hopefully you can pull it off a little better than I did right now. They always pull it off when you're doing knock-knock jokes. Hopefully because it starts with knock-knock, they'll be able to spell knock at the end of all this because it's a silent K. Riddles are fun too. And there's lots of riddling books, and kids make up riddles like what do you call a sleeping bull, a bulldozer, why are fish smart, they move in schools, what lawyer ants call themselves, ant tornies, and so on. And so we actually made a whole book on ant as a beginning, as a prefix, and defined the words and had a lot of creative fun with that. So one of the things you have to do in this kind of spelling program is find the balance between helping children grow their word knowledge by some of the mini lessons you teach, by some of the questions that you answer and investigate, and having them do inquiries into word patterns. Inquiries in twos, inquiries singly, inquiries in groups. And so you're constantly in this balance. And as you're doing this, and you can tell your principal this and they'll be very happy, you're doing deductive thinking because you're giving them the beginning of a pattern and they're finding it out. So you're starting with the hypothesis of observation and you're confirming it. But when they're coming up with the questions, when they're problem finding and when they're answering this, you're doing inductive thinking. You're starting with the observation, working to the pattern, and then to a tentative hypothesis. So it's really important to do deductive and inductive thinking because it leads to deductive and inductive reasoning. And another way to do it is through teaching spelling this way. Now, a possible planning chart on sound would be looking at some of these things as a basis for what you're teaching in sound patterns. You need to know that letter names stay constant but the sounds change because we only have 26 letters in the alphabet and we have 44 sounds. So the sounds need to go in pairs. And these are some of the sound patterns. In syntax, these are some of the syntax patterns. Base words are really critical. They need to know what a base word is so that they can know about endings and plurals and so on. And so if we're looking at meaning makers, and one of the questions they ask is why are some words sounding alike but they're spelled differently? So if I said I was brushing my hair, you would think I was brushing the hair on the top of my head. You wouldn't think I was brushing a rabbit. And in English, that's signaled to us by the spelling. But when you're doing spelling patterns, you have to teach them in the actual pattern, like fair, chair, hair, pear, and fair, bear, care, rare, not together. Meaning patterns are together, but they're apart otherwise. Now, homographs are like park and set, so you can park your car, you can go for a walk in the park. Set is one of the words that has about the most meanings. If you look up Merriam-Webster, there's pages of meanings for set. It can be used as a verb, it can be used as a noun, it can be used all kinds of ways. You can put down a set of keys, you can set eyes on someone, you can set foot somewhere, you can set something in motion, you can set someone straight, it goes on and on. There's lots and lots of definitions. That's another thing that kids seem to enjoy finding out. So let's go back to 4 pictures, 1 word. I gave you a big clue. What's the word?
Set.
Yes. It's a TV set, a tea set, jet set, and chess set. Okay? You have to think about that one. Kids love making these up. They just love to make these up. And usually there's one that's kind of a little off, like jet set. Usually there's one to kind of throw you, and that's deliberate. That's part of the game. So then when you're doing meaning patterns, here's the fun part, to do wordplay, to look at prefixes and suffixes, to look at word origins, to look at meanings, to look at similes, metaphors, and other literacy devices. And so the meaning part is the fun part. Helpful sites for technology links, there's many, and I'm sure you know many of them. If you just Google the ending of a word and you want a huge list, or Yahoo, or any of the search engines, you can generate a huge list of words. I did some work with kids looking at surname origins. First of all, I was the principal of a school where I had 450 kids, and I wanted to know how many countries they came from. And when we mapped it out, we found that they came from 33 countries, and they spoke 23 languages. So I could actually match a kid with nearly anybody from anywhere in the world with someone who spoke to them in their own language. So as well as doing that, we looked at their surnames, and we looked at surname DB or database.com. But a more global one is surnames.behindthename.com, where it gives the origin of names and what they mean and where they come from. All kinds of information on names from all over the world, much more global, really, really good site. And when you want to look for word origins, Merriam-Webster is the best, and it is hyphenated. It's merriam-webster.com, Merriam-Webster. I like having a hyphenated name. I like hyphenated websites. Okay, the most important one of all we're coming to. What matters when you teach spelling? You focus on linking problem solving with words directly to writing. So, one of the things you have to do and look at, I've improved my editing skills by doing this, and there could be a teacher comment or not, depending on whether you think that's important. Now, slow and steady wins the race. If they're working just with plurals, you could be working at the most common plural ending is es or s, so they could check for that. The other one is changing y to I and adding es. They can definitely check for that. So that would just be plurals. They would just be looking at one thing. Sometimes they get very good and they could become experts in plurals. So how does knowing about prefixes help? It can help with word meanings, because hyper from the Greek means over or excessive. So hyperactive and hyperdrive is overdrive or overactive or excessively active. And so that can help them with meanings. We've sort of stopped teaching prefixes. It can help spell the first part of the word. T-E-L-E is a prefix, that means far at a distance. So television, telescope, telecast, teleconference. One kid said to me after we'd done a mini lesson on this, you know what, I've never misspelled television again. He used to always spell it T-E-L-I, which is the most common misspelling. So there's a reason to teach prefixes. Word origins are also fun. Bed is an Old English word that meant digging. And so that's why we have flower beds, I guess, because we dig in the flower bed. The other thing is, in medieval times, in the open hall, they made up a bed. There was no bed there, so they actually made a bed. We have a very different connotation for making a bed, but that's the original meaning of bed. Chat is a form of chatter, short form, mimicking the sound, just as jabber and tweet are, and the modern uses we have are Twitter and tweet, again related to sound. Aero is interesting. Aero came through French aero, meaning air, and we have aero chocolate with air bubbles. We have aerobics, aerial, and aerospace. We use airplane. We don't use the AER, but it stayed in that version. Plane also came from the Greek planos, meaning wanderer. So airplane really means air wanderer. I think that's lovely. I think you could write a poem about that. It really means air wanderer. Now in word narratives, I think it's important that they make up stories, linking again to Bob's talk. We want them to explore where words come from. And hippopotamus means river horse. It came to us through Greek, but actually it was the Romans that brought it to England. And so I think they could do a backstory about that. Here's one backstory. Many years ago, an English traveller sailed to Rome. Shortly after he arrived, he went to a grand show in the Hippodrome. The show opened with a parade of animals, many of which he had never seen. His favourite animal was grey with tiny ears and a wide smile. It had a huge body and short legs that seemed unable to support its bulk, and the traveller thought it looked uncomfortable on land. It seemed as if it should be in water. He had to know what it was called. He asked his Roman friend, who said, "We call it hippopotamus, which means river horse. There is no word for it in your language." "Hippopotamus, you say?" The man smiled. "I can't wait to tell my friends." And so each word narrative could end that way, with the word, the man smiled, or the woman smiled, "I can't wait to tell my friends." And so you can have a lot of fun inventing word narratives. Learning to love words is important, and Jack Spurlowski has a book, and it's called If Not for the Cat. It's a wonderful book with haiku poetry, and he says, if not for the cat and the scarcity of cheese, I could be content. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that a wonderful use of words in a short poem to convey meaning? And think of the takes you could do on that. If not for the scarcity of, I could be content. So lots of writing opportunities from that. And then one of the things you have to do in spelling, because you're creating writers, is teach them to write with adjectives and adverbs. You do that all the time. Here's a poem, boneless, translucent, we undulate gelatinously. Isn't that just wonderful? And of course it's about jellyfish. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful poem. And so, in spelling, why it matters, you need to start by thinking. Always in spelling you need to think. You need to problem solve. Edit carefully. Look for patterns. Link to writing. Inquire and investigate. Notice how words work. And then generate more questions. And if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them now. Thank you for listening.